Most of us that come to Canada to study, myself included, are intending to become permanent residents after our studies. So we want to be able to work in Canada, live in Canada, and also get permanent residence, and of course eventually become Canadian citizens. And that's why we've come here to study. Hi guys, how are you today? Thank you for stopping by my channel. Today we want to talk about a topic that is very important to every international student in Canada. I want to talk about provinces in Canada where you can get your permanent residence fast after you study. Most of us that come to Canada to study, myself included, are intending to become permanent residents after our studies. So we want to be able to work in Canada, live in Canada, and also get permanent residence, and of course eventually become Canadian citizens. That's why we've come here to study. However, a lot of times, because of how intensive Canada study is, we can get so caught up in our studies, caught up in work, that we forget to prepare for permanent residence. We forget to research and find out how we can become permanent residents in that province where we're studying. So that is why I have put together a series of videos showing us the provinces that can give us permanent residence after our studies fast, and the routes that we can use to get permanent residence in these provinces. So we're going to be talking about all the provinces, or specifically 6 provinces in Canada that you can get permanent residence fast. Today we're starting with the province of Ontario. Hey. Now I'm starting with the province of Ontario because this is my province, and it's also one of the biggest, the largest, and the most preferred province in Canada. There are lots of international students, in Ontario, because students like the versatility of Ontario. There are lots of schools in Ontario and lots of opportunities for school as well as for work. Now, if you are a student in Ontario, you're either studying for a 1-year program, a 2-year program, or a 3 or a 4-year program, depending on what you're studying for. Now, if you're studying for a 1-year program in Ontario, or anywhere in Canada, you will get a 1-year post-graduation work permit. Now, the PGWP is the permit that you get to work after your studies. If you're studying for 2 years, you will get a 3-year PGWP. 3 years is the maximum that you can get. Now, the thing about the PGWP is that you get it once and you cannot renew it. So it cannot be renewed. So you have to be careful as per the number of years that you're working, or the number of years that you're schooling, because that will determine the number of years of PGWP that you get. So you cannot study for 1 year, get PGWP for 1 year, and then go study for another 1 year and then expect to get another PGWP. It doesn't work like that. It's once in a lifetime. So if you're in Ontario, what can you do to get your permanent residence after your studies? Now, if you're studying for a 2-year program, or more than 2 years, you're going to get a 3-year PGWP, and that, I feel, is enough time for anyone to get the work experience that they need to apply for permanent residence in Ontario. The problem comes when you're studying for 1 year. So a lot of people, because they're studying for 1 year, they're going to get a 1-year post-graduation work permit. They are worried that it will not be enough to get permanent residence in Ontario. You know the reason is because 1 year of work experience is required for you to get the Canadian Experience class or Express Entry, in order to become a permanent resident. But today I'm going to tell you a couple of, ways that you can become a permanent resident, even though you studied for 1 year in Ontario or whatever number of years you studied. Now, the one thing that I would advise if you studied for a 1 year is a practice called 1+1. Now, there are a lot of people in Ontario who, after doing a 1-year study, they do another 1-year study back to back. So that's why it's called 1+1. You finish 1 year study and you start off another one. So by the time you complete your 2 years, you're liable, or you're eligible to apply for a 3-year post-graduation work permit. And that gives you enough time, to qualify for permanent residence in Ontario. One thing about that 1+1 is that you try to get the second admission while you're still studying for the first one. So don't wait until you have completed your first studies before you now start running around looking for admission into the second studies. Just get it. Even if it's something that you might not even use, have it just in case. The second way that you can become permanent residents in Ontario is using the Express Entry or the Canadian Experience class. Express Entry and Canadian Experience class just require 1 year of skilled work experience in any of the qualifying NOCs. Yeah, so with your education in Canada and your 1 year of skilled work experience, and of course your IELTS, you need to do the English exam, that is the IELTS or the CELPIP or French exam. By the time you have all of that, you can create an Express Entry profile that qualifies you for the Express Entry and the Canadian Experience class. Another way is the provincial nominee program. Now for Ontario, there are 2 routes for international students, and I'm going to go to my computer and share my screen so that you can see while I explain these 2 routes. So it's the Masters or PhD stream, then there's the job offer for international students. So let's go over to my computer while I show that to you. So for you to see the options that are available to you for permanent residence as an international student in Ontario, you have to actually look at the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program, or the OINP as it is popularly called. So if you just went to Google and put in OINP, this will appear. So this is the one you would choose, the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program. The options that are available to you as an international student is, number 1, they have the Masters or PhD program for those who studied Masters or PhD in Ontario. They also have the Employer Job Offer International Student Stream. There are other programs, but these are the ones that concern you as an international student. Now, for the Masters and the PhD graduate stream, you have to have gone to a school in Ontario and studied at the Masters or PhD level. This does not include those who went to a college to do a graduate certificate or a graduate diploma. Unfortunately, it's just for those who did Masters or PhD, and the requirements are probably the same for both of them. The only difference is that one is a Master's and one is a PhD. So if you clicked on it, it will open and it will show you the stream requirements. It says, after you receive an invitation to apply, you may apply to the master's stream. You must meet all the requirements in the categories below. I would like to mention that this is actually the stream that I used to get permanent residence in Canada, but it has changed a bit since, I did it. Now, if you wanted to also put an expression of interest or tell them that you're interested, you would need to register your intention. So this is where you go to register your intention, the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program Expression of Interest System streams here. And then, of course, you see the master stream over here. The master stream, like I said before, it's going to tell you all the conditions of what you need to be able to qualify for this. You must demonstrate that you have the qualifications that you claimed you had in the expression of interest when you registered with OINP. So the first thing will be to do that registration with the OINP. Yeah, and then of course they would ask you all the questions in terms of how you meet the requirements for the program, which you would have stated when you filled out the interest. Like, I don't want to go through that. That's something you can easily go through to fill out the expression of interest. Yeah, so let's just look at what you need to qualify. So you need to, of course, have schooled in Ontario. You must have done a master's or a PhD, which means that you had at least 1 full academic year of full-time study. Part-time studies may qualify if the program is equivalent to at least 1 year of full-time study, and the degree is from an eligible university in Ontario, and they put a list of eligible Ontario universities there. I want to assume it's all the universities in Ontario, but please be sure to check that your university is there. It also says you don't qualify if you're enrolled as a student when you're applying. Yeah, so you have to have graduated before you're applying, except it is for the purpose of meeting the requirements to be licensed in a regulated occupation in Ontario, or you're also working full-time in Ontario. You don't qualify if you have received a bursary, grant, or scholarship that requires you to return to your home country after you earn your master's degree. You may only apply after you have fulfilled these commitments and can demonstrate an intention to live in Ontario. So what we are trying to say is that in some countries, I don't want to mention any particular country, you get a bursary or a grant or a scholarship, and one of the conditions is that you must return to your home country. But trust me, I know a lot of people who got such bursaries, but they were able to get their permanent residence even using this stream. Yeah. Secondly, you need to have the English language or the French or both, yeah? So English language or French or a language test is actually compulsory to get permanent residence in Canada. So they want a CLB 7 or higher. And I don't need to tell you that the higher you have or the higher you score in your language test, the better for you, and the higher your scores will be, yeah? So you have to do the IELTS or the CELPIP. So the CELPIP is the one for Canada, Canadian English Language Proficiency Index Program. And both of them, you have to do the general training test, not the academic test, yeah? And for French, they accept TEF or TCF. Then you need to show that you intend to reside in Ontario or that you are currently living in Ontario. So it says you must have legally lived in Ontario for at least 1 year in the past 2 years before you apply. Note that your 1 year of residency can be cumulative, so which means that there can be gaps there. So maybe you schooled in Ontario, and then after schooling in Ontario for 2 years, you probably went to Nova Scotia for some time. Because you have stayed in Ontario for at least 1 year in the last 2 years, you still qualify. And then settlement funds. So you must have enough money to support yourself and your dependent family members when you settle in Canada, so that your spouse, your common law partner, or any children under the age of 22, including their children. So if you have a child who is 22 or less and they have children, it includes their children, your grandchildren. So your funds must be, of course, in a bank statement that you can verify. Or you have annual earnings from an ongoing employment in Canada, or you have a job offer in Ontario. So if you have a job offer in Ontario, annual earnings from an ongoing employment, it might be able to exempt you from showing settlement funds, yeah? So that's something to note. Also, you need to learn about the amount of money that you need. How much money are you going to need? You need to click on this to check. It says you need to have checked, so let's just check it briefly. I don't want us to get distracted. So it also takes you to the proof of funds for skilled immigrants to Canada. That's the table. I assume you would know about this table by now. And then residency at the time of application. So at the time you apply, you must either be living in Ontario with legal status, that's a study permit, work permit, or a visitor record, or living outside Canada. So what I said earlier, it's probably wrong. It says that you must be living in Ontario with legal status, as you must have a study permit, a work permit, or a visitor record, or living outside of Canada. So even though you're outside of Canada, but you have lived in Ontario for 1 year in the last 2 years, you are qualified. You don't qualify if you're living in a province or a territory in Canada other than Ontario at the time you apply. So for those of you who are thinking of probably going to another province to try to get permanent residence, you will not qualify for this if you are not living in Ontario. And you must have legal status in Canada, yeah? So that goes without saying that you need to be legally living in Canada. You must submit your application within 2 years of completing the requirements necessary to obtain your master's degree. This means that the date on your degree must be within 2 years of your OIMP application submission date, not the date you received the invitation to apply. Yeah, so on the date that you are applying for your OIMP, the date on your degree must be within 2 years. Now they have a scoring factor. Yeah, at the time I did it in 2020, there was no scoring factor. They were not scoring us. We will just apply, and then if you get invited, you get invited. That was it. If they take you, you get invited. But now they are saying if you're invited to apply, you'll be required to submit specific documents to support each scoring factor for which you received points. Yeah. Scoring factors are not the same as stream criteria. You must meet all the criteria for the stream first, and then you get scored. So work or study permit status. So if you have valid work or study permit is 10 points. You don't have one is 0. You have earning history based on the assessment issued. If you earn 40,000 or more, 3 points. Less than 40,000, you get 0. Education, of course, the highest. PhD, you get 10 points. Master's, 8 points, and it goes down like that. And then your field of study also gives you points. If you did something in STEM or health, that's engineering, health, math, computer science, and trades, agriculture, and all of that, you get 12 points. If you did something in the business administration, social, legal, education, behavioral science, social work and related programs, you get 6 points, which is like half of what you get for STEM. Shows you how much Ontario values STEM programs. And if you did arts and humanities, you score 0, which, my goodness, it's not fair, but you score 0. Then you also get points for your Canadian education experience. So if it's more than 1 Canadian credential, 10 points, 1 Canadian credential, 5 points. You score points for language, for regionalization, that's where you live in Ontario. If you're in Northern Ontario, 10 points. If you're in the GTA, except Northern Ontario, you get 8 points. If you're in Toronto, you don't get any points. Oh my goodness. And if you're inside the GTA, except for Toronto, you get 3 points. This is amazing. So Toronto includes the city of Toronto. Yeah. So if you've gotten your IELTS and all of that, you can register an expression of interest here. Yeah. And that's where you now go on and on and on and fill all of that and tell them what you have and all of that. You register an expression of interest, and I think there's an e-filing portal that everybody uses. This is it. So you need to register here with your name and your email address. We'll send you a code. It will bring you back, and then you start filling all of your details. So that is for those who want to go for the master's or the PhD stream. And now you're asking, what if you don't qualify for the master's or the PhD? Because a lot of people in Ontario actually aren't doing master's or PhD, they are doing graduate certificates. So in addition to doing another program, which we mentioned before, you can also use the employer job offer for international students. So there's a stream called the Employer Job Offer International Student Stream. It is another stream, but it requires a job offer. So it gives international students with a job offer in a skilled occupation the opportunity to apply to permanently live and work in Canada. Your job offer must be in a skilled occupation at the tier category 0, 1, 2, or 3 of the National Occupation Classification. So it's not all jobs, yeah? It's the jobs that must be in these categories. This is not the video where we talk about that, but I have a video on my channel where I had talked about the NOC classification, especially for express entry, when they had the tier 1 and the tier 0, A and B, which is tier category 0, 1, 2, or 3 now. Yeah. So you must make sure that you check the National Occupational Classification of your job to be sure that it qualifies. So if you have a job offer that qualifies, you must first register an expression of interest, receive an invitation to apply, and then you can apply online to be nominated by the Ontario government for permanent residence. If you are nominated, then you go and apply to the federal government through IRCC. Yeah, the government of Ontario is going to give you a nomination certificate. I went through that process, so I know. They'll give you a nomination certificate, and that's all you need. The nomination certificate expires as well. I'm not sure, I think it's 6 months. It expires, so you need to have applied for permanent residence within that time. Yeah. So the job offer requirements, first of all, it must be full-time and permanent. It must be in an eligible occupation. We already talked about it. Low wage level. Now, the pay of the job offered must meet or be higher than the low wage level for the occupation in the specific region of Ontario where you live in. There's also a link there for you to find the low wage in your area. You can enter the occupation title, the NOC code, and then you will get the answer. So since you know how much you are earning, by the time you enter all of that, you would know what if your wage falls within that low wage level they are talking about. Yeah. If you're already working in the position, the wage of the job offer must be equal to or greater than the wage level that the employer currently pays you in that position. Yeah. So it talks about all of that. The program does not consider remuneration by piecework, bonuses, commissions, and all of that. It's just your salary. Number 4 is that the position is urgently necessary to employer's business. Work is based in Ontario. So the work you do while in the position must be occurring primarily in Ontario. And as the applicant, of course, you must have received an eligible Canadian degree, from a degree or a diploma that takes at least 2 years to complete, or takes at least 1 year if you are studying full-time basis that requires a completed degree as an admission requirement. So there's education requirement for you. You must, of course, have the valid license or authorization to work at that trade. You must have the intention to live in Ontario, which is, one of the requirements for all the provincial nominee programs. They want you to make a commitment that you're going to live in that province you must have legal status in Canada. If you're applying from within Canada, you must have legal status, and you should maintain the status until the time of nomination. You must submit your application within 2 years of completing the requirements necessary to obtain your degree, your diploma, or certificate. Same with as we said the first time. So you must have completed your degree, diploma, or certificate before you submit your application. Now, the thing about this employer stream is that there are also requirements for the employer. Yeah, employer must meet certain revenue requirements, meaning of report to work, full-time employer form. So your employer needs to fill this form and sign it for you. And that's where some people have issues, because the employers might not want to fill out the form. I did get this nomination as well. The form is like, what, 10 pages with a lot of information that the employers wouldn't want to fill. So my employer at the time refused to fill the form. Yeah. So, but I know that there are other people that their employers do fill the form, but my employer at the time didn't fill the form. So if you have a job that you think you might want to use, you probably want to approach your HR and find out if they would fill that form. Yeah. There's also a scoring for this. So job offer scoring. So if you had knock 1, you get 10 points, knock 2, 8 points, and on like that. The occupational category also has points. The job offer wage, so the wages that you earn has points. At the highest is $40,000 or $40 per hour or higher, 10 points. Where your work or study permit status, your job tenure, 6 months or more working in the job offer gets 3 points. Less than 6 months, 0 points. And of course, the job must be in Canada, must be in Ontario. And then they talk about your earnings history. You get points for education, field of study, Canadian experience, language, get points for regionalization, almost similar to what we talked about for the masters. And then, of course, if you are nominated under this stream, you'll receive by email a nomination approval letter, a work permit support letter if applicable, and a nomination certificate. Now, once you have all of this, you would now be able to apply to RSCC for a work permit. Yeah, you must continue to demonstrate on a reasonable basis an intention to reside in Canada or in Ontario. Keep saying Canada. You must be employed in the approved employment position as of the date of your nomination. If you're already working for the employer, you must apply for work permit within 6 months and begin working in the approved employment position within 10 months from the date of your nomination. If you haven't begun working in the approved position within 10 months from the date of your nomination, you should inform OIMP immediately. Now, you must continue to be employed. This is the one I don't like. You must continue to be employed in the approved employment position during the nomination period until you receive permanent residence. Yeah. Now, this was one of the reasons why I was happy that, this didn't work for me, because it was during COVID, people were losing their jobs. A lot of people did lose their jobs, and they had this, in process. So it was really, really problematic for a lot of people, because they had to be in employment until they got their permanent residence, and it was taking so much time. But you can notify OIMP immediately in writing if there's a change in the nature of your employment, or anything changes, like if the employer has gone out of business or something, or you no longer work for them. Make sure you're telling OIMP. Don't think that they will not know. Inform them of anything that happens. So these are the options that are available for you if you're in Ontario as an international student and you're graduating from maybe a college or university. You can do the 1+1 like we talked about earlier. You can also do the master's or PhD stream if you studied a master's or a PhD, and then you can do the employer job stream for international students. Any of those will get you permanent residence as an international student in Ontario. Okay, so there's also the caregiver stream, but I'm going to talk about that generally in another video, because it doesn't apply to just Ontario. But this was one of the options that I had for myself, as per looking at permanent residence when I was done schooling. Even though I knew that the master's stream was there, the job offer, I was also looking at other programs for caregivers. This is another, good stream: home childcare provider pilot and the home support worker pilot. You need a job offer for these, but they are routes to permanent residence in Canada. And I'm going to talk about it in another video. I don't want this video to be too long. And for this video, we're just talking about Ontario, you know, for international students, how to gain permanent residence. So if you want me to do that video to talk deep about this home childcare provider pilot and home support worker pilot, please, can you just leave a comment? Yeah, I don't want to do videos that people don't want, but if this is something that you want, leave a comment, like this video, give it a thumbs up, and please leave a comment to say that you want to know about the care worker routes to permanent residence in Canada, and I'm going to do a separate video for that. I'm going to do a separate video for that so that those who also, you know, want to take that route can also take that route as well. So guys, I hope you've seen how you can apply for PNP, the Provincial Nominee Program, or the OINP in Ontario using either the Master's or the PhD stream or the job offer for international students. Now, these are options that are available to you. It's not like you don't have options. These options are available to you. Now, the last but not the least is that you can get permanent residence in another province. I know quite a number of students in Ontario who have left the province, have gone to provinces like New Brunswick or Nova Scotia or Saskatchewan because getting permanent residence is easier there. And I'm going to talk about getting permanent residence in those provinces in the upcoming videos. But people have done this. This is another bullet that you can have in your arsenal of how you're going to become a permanent resident, even though you schooled in Ontario, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever number of years you have schooled in Ontario. So if you've been worried about how you can get permanent residence in Ontario, you can relax. Make sure you bookmark this video and go over it over and over again. I've helped you to do all the research. You just have to know what your options are, pick one and pursue it. When I was in Ontario, I had all these options, you know, and well, all these options were available to me. Like, I knew what was available to me, but I was able to pick one, pursue it to the end, and get permanent residence. So you do not need to despair whether you're studying for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. You can become a permanent resident using the OIMP or any of the other routes that we've talked about. If you gain value from this video, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and like it, share it as well. Don't forget that in upcoming videos, we'll be talking about the other provinces and how you can get your permanent residence fast after your studies as an international student. Thank you so much for all your likes, your shares, and your love. I'll talk to you in the next one.